Good evening, friends. We start tonight in the Middle East. Turkey's operation in Syria's Afrin province is in its 34th day. Hundreds of civilians have been killed or injured as the United States is now stuck between two of its allies attacking each other. Reporter Dan Cohen has the story tonight.
The Turkish military escalated its offensive on Syria's Afrin province overnight, raining shells down on the beleaguered city. Syrian state media reports that 625 civilians have been killed or injured since the beginning of what Turkey calls an anti-terror operation codenamed Operation Olive Branch. The attack came as hundreds of pro-government Syrian militiamen poured into Afrin as representatives from Kurdish and the Syrian government struck a deal. Here, they chant, "The Syrian people are united." Turkish officials claim that the attack forced pro-government militias to retreat.
We saw that there was an attempt by a convoy of 20 to 30 or 40 to 50 vehicles coming from around Aleppo to enter the south of Afrin. But this was immediately repelled by our shelling, and these militia forces retreated towards Aleppo.
However, Syrian state media outlets say the fighters have taken up positions in Afrin. So how did this clash of U.S. allies take place? In January, the U.S. announced it was training a mostly Kurdish force to be stationed on Syria's border with Turkey. President Erdogan threatened to strangle the force before it was born, forcing the U.S. to backtrack. The U.S. has been mostly mum as Turkey's invasion kicked off. The U.S. and Turkey remain at odds over Manbij, the city just west of the Euphrates River, where U.S. forces are stationed with Kurdish militias. Meanwhile, the U.S. is continuing to arm its Kurdish allies while discouraging them from joining the fight against Turkey.
Our knowledge in terms of what is going on in Afrin is somewhat limited because we're not operating, because we're not equipping there, because U.S. forces are not there.
As Afrin burns to the ground, the U.S.'s passive stance seems to be of little consolation. In Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
With Turkey trying to oust the Kurds from northern Syria's Afrin, both sides appear to be looking to strike an unlikely alliance. Damascus is reportedly in talks to assist the Kurds, while Ankara has said it would welcome any effort by the Syrian army to drive out what it calls terrorists from Afrin. Murad Gazdiev explains.
Afrin has turned into a bloodbath, a grinding war that is claiming dozens, if not hundreds, of lives every day. Turkish soldiers, their rebel allies, die in droves, near 1,000 dead, reportedly. The Kurds, the YPG, PKK or PYD, some estimates put their losses at over 1,000 in a matter of weeks. The Turkish operation in Afrin isn't so much an advance as it is a meat grinder. This is senseless, yet, according to the belligerents, necessary slaughter. And it's hurting everyone.
We can cooperate with any side that lends us a helping hand in light of the barbaric crimes and the international silence.
There is a possible solution, one that could stop this madness. A man, the least likely candidate of all.
Assad is clearly a terrorist and has carried out state terrorism. There is no peace in Syria, and there cannot be any peace with Assad in power.
The regime says we will hand over our regions to the region's army. We will never hand them over.
That was then, before the US-led anti-ISIS coalition began butchering each other. Now, when everyone's dying and they need him, Assad isn't such a bad guy anymore.
If the regime is entering there to cleanse the PKK and PYD, then there are no problems. However, if it comes in to defend the YPG...
And Syria, big time in the headlines again, two real hotspots. We'll start with this, the northern city of Afrin. That's come under heavy shelling from the Turkish army. Ankara's ramped up its operation in that region to try to dislodge the Kurdish fighters, which it says and sees are terrorists. That bombardment came after a pro-Syrian government militia arrived in Afrin to join the fight against the Turkish military. For his part, Turkey's President Erdogan saying the shelling forced that group of fighters to retreat 10 kilometres. But other conflicting reports suggest, in fact, the pro-Syrian government forces have actually taken up positions now in Afrin. You're currently seeing here pictures of their arrival, purported to be on Tuesday night. Our senior correspondent, Murad Gazdiev, next takes a closer look at this unfolding, very complicated, volatile situation.
This was a demonstration. Hundreds of pro-Assad militia fighters with tanks, armor, brazenly riding into Afrin, with smiles, cheers and cameras. The Turks, well, see for yourself. Ankara's response was explosive, loaded and delivered in artillery shells.
Today, towards evening, it was determined by the HTS militia that about 10 pickup trucks were coming towards Afrin. They were then forced to turn back following the shelling. This case has been closed for now.
Erdogan warned that this would happen. No one may help the YPG, he said. As for the Kurds themselves, he's promised to put them in a chokehold in mere days.
The preparation on the ground takes time. In the coming days, we will lay siege to the city of Afrin.
Here you have two major anti-ISIS coalition partners, terrorist and aggressor, as they call each other, Turkey and the YPG, a partner in all but name, duking it out, beating each other to bloody pulp. One might ask, where is America, the head of the US-led anti-ISIS coalition?
Why are you still here? Why are these weapons still arriving? America is in the process of creating a terrorist army on our border. Do not encroach on our borders. Do not provoke us. We will run out of patience.
Let's not forget how it all began with this statement, a US declaration that it would build an army of Kurds to patrol the Turkish border. That sent Erdogan into a fit, rage. And it was that statement that was used to justify this new war. Washington backtracked. It's now laying low, but the damage was done. The coalition imploded, and it's up to others to stop this.
We do not believe that the US will protect the Kurds. The US strategy depends on creating new chaos in the Middle East to pursue its interests in this region.
It is sad. Washington set the fire that is now consuming its own anti-ISIS coalition and burning Afrin to the ground. The US role has been reduced to diligently expressing its concern. Worry, but not regret.
Now, that's something that Middle East analyst Joshua Landis agrees with. He says the Kurds have fallen victim to America's power play in that region.
The U.S. has been supplying a lot of weaponry to the Kurds east of the Euphrates. When the United States first entered into Syria, Turkey and the United States came up to an agreement that everything west of the Euphrates was Turkey's. Everything east of the Euphrates, the United States. Manbij is a sore point, but that's still to be decided on. But that's the way it's been, and the United States has been giving a lot of weapons to the YPG. Now, it's obviously telling the YPG, do not attack Turkey with these weapons, because the moment you do that, you will justify everything that Erdogan says is going to happen, that you're connected with the PKK. And so the United States is sitting on the Kurds, and in essence is telling the YPG, you have to sacrifice your brothers in Afrin to preserve U.S. help east of the Euphrates.
Meantime, the situation in another Syrian hotspot is developing too. Violence in the eastern Ghouta area, close to the Syrian capital Damascus, is on the rise, and it's provoked an outcry from the United Nations too. The organisation is calling for an end to hostilities after what's going on there, following reports that government airstrikes on the rebel enclave there have killed at least 100 in just the last recent days. Eastern Ghouta is one of the few remaining opposition strongholds. The Syrian government says its strikes on the militants are in retaliation, though, for shelling attacks that have killed civilians in the capital. The area, may recall, was among the de-escalation zones that were established by the warring parties last year. We'll be across that story, of course, as more comes out from that area. Keep you up to date on the developments there over the coming hours and days.
We start with breaking news here on RT International, as Syrian pro-government forces are now entering the northern Kurdish-held region of Afrin. And that's according to RT's correspondent who is at the scene. It comes after multiple reports that Damascus has made a deal with Kurds in Afrin to help them fight a Turkish army offensive. However, these reports are not yet confirmed. On Tuesday, President Erdogan announced that Turkey's army will encircle Afrin in a bid to oust Kurdish forces.
The preparation on the ground takes time. In the coming days, we will lay siege to Afrin city.
Kurdish teachers and schoolchildren have marched through Afrin in protest over the Turkish military offensive in their region. Kurdish YPG militias have previously denied reports that they've reached a deal with Assad's forces. Meanwhile, Ankara says it would welcome Syrian army efforts as long as they only target what Turkey calls Afrin's terrorists.
الجيش السوري
There's been no reports of any clashes or any military movements overnight, and certainly no sign of Syrian troops entering Afrin, at least not yet. It's not clear whether they would be able to enter the town without the Turkish military allowing them passage. There's been some very strong words from Turkish officials over the past day. Yesterday, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, he said that Turkey could allow Syrian forces to enter Afrin if they're going in there to replace or to remove the YPG troops. But later in the day, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the phone, and according to reports, he told Putin that if the Syrian troops attempt to enter Afrin, Turkey would repel them, that there would be serious consequences, and that Turkey plans to continue with its ongoing military operation. Those strong words are continuing today. A Turkish presidential spokesman only this morning questioned whether there is actually any agreement between the YPG and the Syrian regime to allow Syrian troops to enter Afrin. He denounced reports suggesting that there is as black propaganda.
Syrian pro-government forces are expected to help Kurdish militia defend the city of Afrin. That's according to Syrian state media. It follows an alleged deal between Damascus and the Kurds. Under the agreement, pro-Assad troops will help Kurdish fighters repel Turkey's offensive in the region. This footage, filmed by our Ripley video news agency on Saturday, shows what appears to be the construction of a temporary military base in Afrin. RT's Paula Sleer has more on how Turkey has reacted to the potential alliance between the Syrian government and the Kurdish groups.
In the coming hours, it is widely expected that pro-Damascus government forces will enter the northern Syrian region of Afrin. We're hearing that according to Syrian state TV. Now, there they'll provide assistance to Syrian Kurds who, for the better part of a month, have been trying to repel a Turkish military offensive. This latest development follows a deal that was allegedly sealed on Sunday between Damascus and the Syrian Kurds. Now, the Turkish foreign minister has responded, saying that that Ankara has no problem with pro-government forces entering Afrin, but only so long as those forces are there to eliminate Kurdish groups that Turkey considers terrorist groups. If that's not their goal, then certainly Ankara does have a problem.
If regime forces enter the city to eliminate the PKK and PYD terrorists, then we don't have a problem with that. However, if they go there to defend the YPG, then nothing can stop our soldiers.
Now, this part of the region has been embroiled in bitter violence for at least a month, ever since Ankara launched its military operation called Olive Branch against Kurds who it regards as terrorists. Now, this fierce fighting has resulted in multiple casualties as well as civilian deaths on both sides of the conflict. Talking about civilians, those who live in the Afrin region have hailed the potential entrance of pro-Damascus government forces into their area.
As a citizen of Afrin, I do not find fault with the Syrian forces entering some points on the border. As residents of Afrin, we never wanted partition.
There is a duty of the Syrian government to defend its borders and protect Afrin, which is within Syrian borders.
Ankara launched its military operation after the Pentagon announced that it was helping to establish a Kurdish-led security border force along the Turkish-Syrian border. Ankara responded with fury, accusing the United States of essentially setting up what are called a terror army. Since then, the United States has tried to backtrack, but essentially it's too little too late, and the situation on the ground is really beyond the point of being able to change. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who's been following these developments carefully, has said that America's involvement inside Syria has resulted in this bloodshed.
We are concerned about attempts to partition Syria. Some of the plans that the US has already started to realize on the ground are worrying. The US claims that their only goal in Syria is to fight ISIL and to preserve the country's integrity. But I think that Washington needs to back its words with actions, because right now its actions look provocative. The US used the Kurds to pursue its own ambitions, and that's led to a major conflict in Afrin.
Now, tensions on the ground continue to escalate, despite the fact that in the past month, the United States has tried on various occasions to try and de-escalate the situation. What remains now, of course, is to see how this latest development escalates tensions even further.
Well, we're going to discuss this further with military analyst Kamal Alam. Kamal, welcome to the programme. Let's start with what you think this development means for the conflict in the area.
I think it's quite a significant and positive development if it holds through. And it's not completely surprising. The Syrian Kurds had asked the Syrian government for help a week ago, and the Syrian government themselves had said that it's their sovereign territory and it's only their forces that should be operating there and no non-state actors. And if the Syrian military go through and they're back in control of the area, that means Turkey has really no legitimacy to remain in the area, and they'll have to withdraw back to Turkish borders.
So does that mean the Syrian government needs to pick a side in the conflict between Turkey and the Kurdish groups, in your opinion?
It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because as we've seen, the Turkish reaction has been that if the Syrian government goes there and takes over the area and there's no threat to Turkey, Turkey has no problem with that. So Turkey, on paper, are still saying that they support Syrian sovereignty. So Syrian being the government, they have every right to go in there. So it doesn't necessarily mean Turkey will be opposed to this. However, if the Turkish military remains there and comes into direct conflict with the Syrian military, that could be a big issue.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think the consequences are going to be with this alleged deal between Damascus and the Kurds?
I think the consequences are that the US policy of using the Kurds for their own advantage could fall apart, because essentially the Americans have been saying that they are present in northern Syria to help the SDF and the Syrian Kurds fight against the terrorists. But there are no more ISIS in that area. And if the Syrian government moves in, the US have to move out. So the consequences is that the last remaining card that the Americans had in northern Syria falls apart. And if the Turkish government realize that the Syrians have a right to be there, this could be a very positive development. If, however, the Turkish government choose to keep supporting the Syrian rebel groups, then there could be a conflict.
You mentioned there that you say that, you know, it'll come to fruition that Washington, that they'll have to move out. How likely do you think that's going to happen? How is it going to happen?
I mean, at the moment, the Americans have been very adamant they're not going to move out. I mean, Turkey, which is their NATO ally, have also asked them to move out, especially from Manbij, which isn't that far from Afrin. So it really depends, because the Americans were hoping and counting on the Turkish-Syrian governments clashing. If that doesn't happen, that means the US has very little right to be there. So at the moment, it looks unlikely that the US will move out because they need a reason to be there. So we'll wait to see. It's still very early to make a judgment on what the Americans do next.
You know, if we stick with their support, do you think this new alliance is going to affect Washington's support for the Kurdish groups?
Potentially. We already saw for the last 2 weeks that the Kurdish groups were critical of the Americans, saying that the Americans have abandoned us and we're on our own, because once Turkish military moved in, the Americans were not providing much support to the Kurdish forces. So as far as the Kurds go, they already were feeling let down by the Americans, and that's why they've asked the Syrian government to move in, because a month ago this probably would not have been on the cards. But as the Kurds saw that America has not been a very reliable ally, they've moved back to Damascus, which had an agreement with them that they would help them as long as Syrian sovereignty is not violated and Damascus has the monopoly in terms as being the state.
OK, well, it is a developing situation, as always. Military analyst Kamal Alam, thanks very much for coming onto the programme.
Good evening, friends. We start tonight with what could lead to direct confrontation between Syria and Turkey. Pro-government fighters have been reportedly moved into the Turkish-held region of Afrin, Syria. This is an area Turkey has been targeting in their fight against the Kurds. Now the Turkish military is threatening artillery fire. Our reporter Dan Cohen has more on the story tonight.
More than a month after the Turkish offensive on Afrin province began, codenamed Operation Olive Branch, pro-Syrian government militias entered the region to assist Kurdish militias under attack. It's a significant realignment of forces operating in the region that could bring calm or could erupt into a bloodbath. Turkish President Erdogan said his forces have already begun shelling pro-Syrian government positions.
Now, today towards evening, it's been determined by the Shiite militia that about 10 pickup trucks were coming towards Afrin. Then they were forced to turn back following the shelling from Turkey or Turkey-backed forces. This file has been closed for now. During the conversations with Mr. Putin and Mr. Rouhani, we have already agreed on these issues, and I said, these kinds of terror organizations may take such wrongful steps sometimes when they decide on their own. Of course we cannot let them do it. They would pay a high price.
Afrin province is located in northwestern Syria and shares a border with Turkey. A NATO member and U.S. ally, Ankara has long sought to overthrow the Syrian government and invaded Afrin province on January 19th, attacking Kurdish positions. But the U.S. has also supplied arms to the Kurdish People's Protection Unit, or YPG, a group that Turkey claims is a branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, which it says is a terrorist organization. When Turkey attacked YPG positions in Afrin province, the U.S. stood by and said Turkey has legitimate security concerns. With the U.S. passive as Turkey attacked, the YPG looked to the Syrian army. Despite its long-standing position, it would not cooperate. And with the Syrian government asserting sovereignty over Afrin province, Turkish fears of a breakaway Kurdish state may be allayed. This would represent a significant success for the Syrian army and its allies in Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia, who have sought to stabilize the country amid a proxy war waged by the U.S., Turkey, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Israel also recently admitted to carrying out thousands of anti-government operations in Syria over the past year and has bombed the Syrian military and Hezbollah positions more than 100 times since 2012. However, the Syrian military recently shot down an Israeli warplane. With the Syrian government asserting itself against foreign aggression, the rules of the game seem to have changed. In Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
In the northern enclave of Afrin, the Turkish offensive to drive out Kurdish militia is met with more resistance than it had anticipated. State TV and the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that pro-Syrian government forces armed with heavy machine guns could be seen entering the area, ready to help the Kurds fight back. On Tuesday, Turkey's president said he had the support of Russia and Iran in blocking pro-Syrian government forces from entering Afrin.
We have agreed with Russia and Iran regarding the Afrin issue. These kinds of terror organizations take wrong steps with the decisions they take. It is not possible for us to allow this. They will pay a heavy price for their mistakes.
But Erdogan's rhetoric sang a different tune to that of Russia's foreign minister, who repeated his call for dialogue instead of combat.
I'm convinced that Turkish legal interests with regards to ensuring security can be fulfilled and satisfied through direct dialogue with the Syrian government.
A month into the operation to drive the Kurds out of Afrin, Turkish forces have been making slow progress. The offensive also puts further strain on already tense diplomatic relations between Turkey and the US, its NATO ally. The US has supported the YPG because of their efficiency in clearing the Islamic State group out of large swaths of Syria, claiming the territory for themselves.
دائما دعواتنا لكم بالسلامة كل فريق الميادين. هذه قذيفة أيضا قريبة وهذه قذيفة أخرى قريبة تقع. هو استهداف مباشر وقريب للغاية. يقترب هذا القصف. اعطيني الدرع يا موسى. يقترب هذا القصف من هذه المنطقة ونقول تحت أعين الطائرات استطلاع التركية.
Syrian state television announces that forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad will be deployed to Afrin. Turkey launched an operation against the People's Protection Units, or YPG, who are in control of the province almost a month ago. Ankara calls the YPG a terrorist organization. The United States considers the group its most effective ally in fighting ISIL. This new move by Damascus in Afrin could mean its allied militia directly confronts Turkish troops. Turkey's foreign minister was defiant.
If the regime is entering there to cleanse the PKK and PYD, then there are no problems. However, if they come in to defend the YPG, then nothing and nobody can stop us. This applies to Afrin as well as Manbij and to the east of the Euphrates River.
The developments hints at behind-the-scenes negotiations, the details of which are unclear.
If the Kurds are going to accept the major conditions of the Syrian regime, i.e., will they surrender their heavy weapons, i.e. tanks, artillery and rocket launchers? Will they be exiting the city? Because the Syrian regime is asking the Syrian Democratic Forces to exit the city and to move to the east of the Euphrates.
The Kurdish YPG holds the areas in yellow, which include the region of Afrin. The green areas land controlled by the Syrian opposition, supported by Turkey, and they're advancing on Afrin under the Turkish Operation Olive Branch. President Assad's government controls the area to the south, and the YPG's territory to the east of the Euphrates is where the US has military bases and personnel on the ground. Syria's 7-year war seems to have entered a new phase, with the foreign powers who have long backed different sides trying to solidify their spheres of influence. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera.